Good morning. It's good to be back with you again. Thank you to Jeremy for preaching last week. It was a great message and a good reminder that I know I needed. I pray that you benefited from chapter 5 and his message as well. Today we're going to be in chapter 6 of Daniel as we work our way through learning what it looks like to be faithful in exile. We believe in a living God. A God who is alive, not a God who is dead, one who is alive, who is active, who is involved, who's present in his creation. God is always present. It doesn't mean his presence is always clear and obvious to us. Sometimes he stands in the background of our lives and just beyond kind of the horizon of our perception if we're not very attentive to him and what he's up to. But there's no doubt he is always present there. I want you to think back for a moment to a time in your life, maybe the first time in your life, when God in a very clear and tangible way stepped out of the background of your life into the foreground, made his presence clearly known to you in an unmistakable way. Maybe it was something very simple, but it had a lot of power. Maybe it was something really huge, really significant, some sort of miracle or act of God. When I think of this, a situation in my life probably 17 years ago now comes to my mind. I was working for a commercial construction company. We were on a pretty small job at that point, kind of in between seasons, if you will. And in my time with God, over several days, I had really felt this impression that I was a really self-centered person, that I wasn't very good at loving people. And so this particular morning, as I was spending time with God, I remember praying clearly. I said, God, give me clear opportunities today to love people well, to love other people well. And God, make it so clear that I can't miss it. I finished getting ready for work, and I went to work, and small job, just two of us, me and this guy named Randy. And Randy had beat me there that morning, and I walked in, and typical, coat and stuff I'm carrying in. Hey, Randy, how you doing this morning? And he goes, well, not very well. I said, oh, really? What's up? And he had just this look on his face. And he said, Jeff, I haven't eaten in 3 days. And at that moment, God stepped in and was like, you asked for an opportunity, Jeff. Here it is. And so over the next day or two, because I knew payday wasn't for a bit, Deborah and I took the opportunity to love Randy really well, to help provide food for him and those sort of things. It was that like small little thing, right? Like just this interaction with Randy at work. Still to this day, when those moments when I start to wonder, is my prayer time just me talking to the wall, or is God really listening? I remember Randy. And I think, no, God's here. It may not be obvious, like he may not have stepped to the forefront here lately, but he is here. And there's no mistake that he is hearing what I'm praying. For those of us who want to walk faithfully with God, we need these kind of moments. We need these memories. We need these experiences so that in those moments when God's presence is less obvious, less overt, less foreground, we remember that he is in fact present. He is in fact living. He is there and with us. Those times of difficulty or doubt, those memories, those moments come back and help us to be faithful. Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6 are match pair. Partially because of the similarities. We're going to get to that here in a moment. And if you remember chapter 3 as we read through 6, you're going to see the similarities. They just jump off the page at you. But I think there's another reason why these two are a match pair. And it has to do with the timeline, the distance between the two, the series of events. See, chapter 3, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're refusing to bow to worship the statue and getting thrown into the fiery furnace only for God to rescue them. That happened within a few years of their exile. They would not have been in Babylon very long when that happened. Chapter 6 happens about 60 years later. So even the distance from chapter 5 to 6 is a large distance. Daniel is now probably pushing 80 in terms of his age. Upper 70s, low 80s, somewhere in that range of age. A lot has happened in this time frame. And my suspicion is that as we go through chapter 6, chapter 3 has something to do with chapter 6. I don't know if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are still alive when chapter 6 happens. We're not told anything about them, so who knows if they're around or not. But I suspect that the story of chapter 3 was a story that had lingered in the life of Daniel. One of those stories that he just couldn't stop telling. I picture him as an older guy, only older guys tell stories this way. You know, these stories from like way back, and the stories of wisdom, and the story of where they're reliving whatever the story is as they're telling it to the younger generation. And I picture people in and around Daniel's life asking questions about this God he serves, and asking questions about what his experiences with God have been, and him recounting the story of his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and telling other people this story of God stepping into the forefront in such a powerful way. I can imagine the look on the kids' face when they hear this story. Like, whoa. And the look on adults' faces like, that can't be true. And Daniel's like, it is. These were my buddies. I think chapter 3 influences chapter 6 in the life of Daniel, and in one of those moments in his life where God stepped forward that he relies upon, that he taps back into throughout the rest of the course of his life, and especially here in chapter 6. So let's read chapter 6. Let's see what God is up to here in this chapter. Chapter 6, verse 1. It seemed like a good idea to Darius to appoint over the kingdom 120 satraps who would be in charge of the entire kingdom. Over them would be 3 supervisors, one of which was Daniel. Those satraps were accountable to them, and so the king's interests might not incur damage. Now, we've never been introduced to this guy Darius before. Something significant has happened in this time frame between chapter 5 and 6, and that is that the Medo-Persian Empire has conquered the Babylonian Empire. You remember the couple times in the first 5 chapters, we get this sequence of kingdoms laid out for us. One of those dominoes has now fallen. It's now the Persian Empire that is where Daniel is. He is no longer serving the Babylonian kings. He's serving the Persian kings. That in and of itself is a miracle of God, that he wouldn't have been just done away with in that transition. But here he is. It says that Darius, or also known as Cyrus the Great, that he was going to put 3 supervisors over the country and then 120 satraps under them. Daniel was one of the 3 supervisors in this group. So here's Darius. He's setting up his new government with this new expansion of his kingdom. And so we see Daniel's role in this. In verse 3, it says, now Daniel was distinguishing himself above the other supervisors and the satraps, for he had an extraordinary spirit. In fact, the king intended to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Consequently, the supervisors and satraps were trying to find some pretext against Daniel in connection with administrative matters. This is the tension rising in the story. Daniel is different than the rest. There is a characteristic about Daniel that sets him apart from all the others, and it's described here as an extraordinary spirit. The term here is the term ruach. It's the term used throughout the Old Testament to describe the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, the ruach. The Spirit of God is showing through him in a way it isn't through anyone else. And it's distinguishing him. It's setting him apart in a different way. His presence in the room is just different than everyone else's presence in the room. His attitude, his actions, his heart, his perspectives, his countenance, they were different. He was thriving in a way none of the others were, not because he was extraordinary, but because the Spirit within him, God's Spirit, was extraordinary. I don't know if you've ever met somebody like this. One of those people that just being around them is different than being around most people. There's something about them that God just sort of seeps through their lives out into the world around them in a way that you sometimes can't even just explain. You can't put your hands on exactly how it is. That person's different, but that person is just different. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of these folks in the world. There are a lot of us that believe in Jesus and have the Holy Spirit within us, but not many of us that get to the place of sanctification, of purification, of God living through us, our relationship with him where he truly just like soaks through us and permeates out into the world around us. I pray someday that it's true of me. I pray someday it's true for you, that we are some of those people. I feel like I'm a long way off today, but maybe someday. I wonder what it would take for you and I to make the journey to that place. What kind of habits, what kind of lifestyle? What is it that we need to do? Our part. God obviously is the one by his grace that does this sort of thing, but what is our part in that journey? That someday we could be like Daniel, and just our presence in the room, people are like, that one's different. Something for us to think about today. Not for our glory, of course, but for his, that we could be on that journey as a person. You know, it's interesting. Daniel, he's setting himself apart, but it gets more impressive here as we go. We finish verse 4, and they were trying to find pretext to find accusation against him. Verse 4 finishes and says they were unable to find any such damaging evidence because he was trustworthy and guilty of no negligence or corruptions. So these men concluded, we won't find any pretext against this man Daniel unless it is in connection with the law of his God. Daniel's such a man of integrity that even his opponents can't find accusation against him. That's significant. Integrity comes from this word integer, which means whole. It means that our lives are wholly congruent, that every aspect of our lives match. There isn't like this disconnectedness. Your private life, your work life, your social life, your church life, your thought life, your emotional life, your hobbies, your life in McCook, your life on a business trip out of town. All of it is in alignment. All of it is consistent with the same character and quality as God. It is whole. That's integrity. Paul, in his first letter to Timothy, is discussing the qualifications to be an elder or a deacon, and he uses the term above reproach. It's another way of saying integrity. Saying that your character is of such consistency, such integrity, that an accusation or discreditation against you would be seen as outlandish. Because that person has such integrity that just can't be true of them. True integrity is rare. Very few people have true integrity. And that too, like an extraordinary spirit, is something I pray we all have. Something we all are embarking upon, growing towards. Integrity takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work consistently over a long period of time. And integrity can be destroyed in an instant. One uncontrolled outburst, one situation, one bad decision, one moment. And your integrity can be shot, but it takes years to build. I think, at least for me, we could stop our study of chapter 6 right here. And I would have plenty to wrestle with this week. Plenty to pray over. Plenty to consider in my life where I stand with God and with my character, with my being. What's being described here of Daniel in this situation is noteworthy. The only grounds for accusation his enemies could find on him was his faith in Yahweh. Let that be true of our lives. That the only stone that could be cast at us is that we are Christians, that we are following Jesus. Otherwise, we are people of character and integrity and spirit. In verse 6, it says, so these supervisors and satraps came by collusion to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. To all, that's going to be important, to all the supervisors of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the counselors, the governors, it seemed like a good idea for a royal edict to be issued and an interdict to be enforced. For the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human other than you, O king, should be thrown into the den of lions. Now let the king issue the written interdict so that it cannot be altered according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be changed. And so King Darius issued the written interdict. They said, all of them, all of us have agreed. It's a lie. Because if all of them had, Daniel would have known about it. And Daniel doesn't know about it. Daniel was a man of integrity and character. These men were not. How often do we do this, though? We blow things out of proportion to make a case for what we want. Everybody's saying. Actually, everybody isn't. Some, not everybody. It's very common. We use this when we try to manipulate and control situations as we want them to be. It's exactly what these guys are doing. They're out to get Daniel. They don't have a way to do it other than manipulating the situation. And so their plan is to flatter Darius, to get him to pass this edict, which he does, that nobody can worship any god or any person other than him for 30 days. Remember, this goes at Daniel's faith in Yahweh. In these desert civilizations, one of the ways they would store water is into the rock of the ground. They would hollow out these caverns, kind of like underground cisterns or water towers, right? A place where they could store water. And in the times and the seasons when they didn't need them to store water, they would use them as prisons, as jails. You drop someone in, they can't get out. And for whatever reason, Darius had decided to put some lions in one of his. And these guys thought this was a great idea. That would be the punishment for the next 30 days for whoever it is that's not going to follow this edict, namely Daniel. Now, there's an interesting statement here. It says that according to the Medo-Persian law, a law made couldn't be changed. That seems odd to us. Seems inconvenient to us that once you make a law, you can't change it. But it must have been true in their culture because even in the book of Esther, which takes place in the Medo-Persian Empire, it says twice in the book of Esther that this is true. So we have 3 references in Scripture to this being a fact in their culture. It must have been the case. And so here, Darius has now made this edict, and now it can't be changed. They're stuck. No matter what happens now, they're stuck with it. So verse 10. When Daniel realized that a written decree had been issued, he entered his home, where the windows in the upper room opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he was kneeling and offering prayers and thanks to his God, just as he had been accustomed to doing previously. Daniel finds out about this new law, and his response is to do what he always does. Pray. It's clear from the passage. He has a habit of praying. You notice he didn't go gossip about it. He didn't worry about it. He didn't try to concoct a plan to manipulate things around it. He prayed about it. He had a lifestyle of prayer. I picture Daniel here in his upper 70s, maybe early 80s in age, being on his knees in prayer often. It's impressive. I think that's one of the reasons why he was a man of extraordinary spirit and great integrity. I would suggest to us that if we want to be that kind of people, that we should have a robust prayer life like Daniel's. You can't neglect that and achieve those 2 desires. Daniel assumes a posture of vulnerability and of submission to God. He was asking for help, we're going to see here in a moment, knowing he was breaking the law. And he had no intention of doing otherwise. Prayer was what he knew. It was the pattern for life. It was how he lived. He was going to pray. He isn't being malicious towards this law. It's just what he knows. It's what has got him through 60 years of captivity as an exile in a foreign place. Prayer. It's what he's going to do. So he does. He knows it's his source of life and connection with God. And so he continues to pray. I might suggest to us that when things aren't going well, that maybe the first place we start is prayer. Not a last resort, but a first place. I've discovered in my life that the very few people that I know, that I've met, that have been of extraordinary spirit and of unquestionable integrity, all of them are people of prayer. You can't disconnect these things. There's a challenge here for us. If you're an older folk with us, someone who has walked with God for decades now, I would ask you, how well do you match Daniel? How well does your spirit, your integrity, your prayer life match Daniel's? For those of us who are younger, who haven't had the miles on the journey yet, we have something to aim at. We have an example here to follow. So that if by God's grace we get to be a similar age, perhaps we can be like Daniel. Why doesn't God prevent Daniel from getting caught? You ever ask that question? Like, couldn't he have just prevented this whole thing? If God really is present, if he really is active and attentive, couldn't he have just stepped in and said, they're never going to find him for 30 days? For whatever reason, God decides he wants to rescue Daniel through this trial, not from the trial. And that happens to us, that there are often situations we don't like, we want to avoid, we don't like being in, and we can ask God, why did you allow this? I don't know. None of us know God's mind in that way. But what we can trust is that whatever God does, whatever he allows, he wants to have the best for us and bring him glory. And if that means going through it, that's what he's going to ask us to do. Some of us have been asked to walk some very difficult roads. And only when we understand his living presence, trusting him in our lives, do we walk that road well. So verse 11, those officials who had gone to the king came by collusion and found Daniel praying and asking for help before his God. So they approached the king and they said to him, "Did you not," as if they don't know the answer, "issue an edict to the effect that for the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or human other than you, O king, would be thrown into the den of lions?" They're setting him up, aren't they? The king replies, "That's correct, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be changed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the edict that you issued. 3 times daily he offers his prayers." Daniel prays and gets caught. I'm sure these guys had a great plan in place on how they were going to keep watch on his house, and it worked. They caught him. Did you not? They're trapping him. Notice how they refer to Daniel, though, as one of those captives. The guy's been here 60 years. The guys making the accusation against him probably haven't been alive as long as Daniel's been here. It's true, but hardly like fitting to describe him still as a captive from Israel. They're demeaning him. They're trying to tear down his credibility by bringing back origins that probably have no basis here at all. They also say that he pays no attention to you, king. That's a lie. After all, he was distinguishing himself. He was serving Darius and the previous king so well, he kept getting promoted, and he was set for another one, wasn't he? It's not true. We got to be careful. Sometimes when we have a grind with somebody, we only see the negative. We miss all the positives. And we start to compromise our character in our efforts to get them. That's exactly what these guys are doing. It's true that Daniel was not paying attention to the edict. Guilty. Past that, everything they've said here is false. They're just out to get the guy. When the king heard this, he was very upset. And he began thinking about how he might rescue Daniel from this predicament. Until late afternoon, he was struggling to find a way to release him. And then those men came by collusion again to the king and said to him, "Recall, O king, that it's the law of the king of the Medes and the Persians that no edict or decree that the king issues can be changed." They continue to pursue him, and the king, notice though, is grieved by Daniel's position. He's grieved. That's something different. We haven't heard that yet. The king cared about Daniel. It's interesting, the word here, it says when Darius was struggling to figure out how to free Daniel, the words used here are actually very graphic words to describe an animal caught in a trap, struggling to free themselves. I picture a coyote like chewing his own leg off, right? Like that struggle for survival that exists in that moment is what is used to describe Darius and his attitude towards Daniel. He is grieving for this situation for Daniel, struggling. How do I get around this and free him? And the group comes back, not only to remind them that the law can't be changed, but Darius knows that the other parts of the law say that judgment must be executed by sunset. The clock's ticking. The king has to follow through. He's young in his position, his kingdom and its expansion is young. He would lose all credibility and all power if he changed his own rules. So he knows he's stuck. So the king gave the order, and Daniel was brought down and thrown into the den of lions. The king consoled Daniel by saying, "Your God, whom you continually serve, will rescue you." Then a stone was brought and placed over the opening of the den. The king sealed it with his signet ring and with those of his nobles so that nothing could be changed with regard to Daniel. And then the king departed to his palace. But he spent the night without eating, and no diversions or entertainment were brought to him. He was unable to sleep. The king truly is concerned about Daniel. There's a relationship here that's different than what we've experienced. The king comforts Daniel with a statement of confidence in God. I don't know if the king believed it or not, but he makes a clear statement of, your God is able to save you, Daniel. I think it's interesting at this juncture in the story, we haven't heard much from Daniel, haven't we? Like, we know he prayed. We know it tells us that he prayed for help. But we haven't heard from Daniel. I wonder what's happening inside him. I wonder what he's thinking about as he's approaching the moments leading up to this pit. I wonder if he's scared. I wonder if he's wrestling or if he's confident. I wonder what memories are flashing back from those times in the past when God stepped out of the background into the foreground of his life. Maybe he was remembering back to the time when God was faithful and made him healthy when they shouldn't have been. Gave him wisdom to succeed when they even didn't want to. Maybe they were thinking about that time that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and God gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation. I wonder if he thought about the time when Nebuchadnezzar acted like an animal and then God made him back normal again. That was stepping into the forefront, wasn't it? Or the time God's hand came out and wrote on the wall and Daniel interpreted it and then it happened. That's a big one. Or about the time that Daniel's friends were thrown into a very similar pit and God rescued them through it. I wonder what was going through Daniel's mind. All these memories, all these reminders of God's faithfulness and what it was doing within him. In the morning, at the earliest signs of daylight, the king got up and rushed to the lion's den. As he approached the den, he called out to Daniel in a worried voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you continually served, able to rescue you from the lions?" I don't know if Darius knows it or not, but he reminds us of something, that our God's a living God. The power of that statement, the significance of that statement. Darius phrases in a question. I don't know if Darius believed his previous statement or not, or if he had doubts overnight, what his situation, what his relationship with God is, but he is rushing out of concern for Daniel with hope of all hopes, that Daniel's living God that he proclaims has been alive, has been attentive, has been paying attention to Daniel and his situation, and has perhaps rescued him. If our God is living, he's always with us. If he's dead, we're on our own. It's what separates us from every other religion. We don't worship a rock or a stone. Our God is living. And then Daniel spoke to the king. Woohoo! Yeah, like how is that possible? He's alive. Yes. You can imagine the relief on Darius's face. Like, oh. Daniel spoke. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and closed the lion's mouth so that they would not harm me, because I was found to be innocent before him. Nor have I done any harm to you, O king. God sent an angel to protect him. I want us to think back to chapter 3 real quick, of all the similarities here between 3 and 6. Have you caught them? Chapter 3, worship a statue. Chapter 6, worship Darius. Both refused. Both had conspirators come against them. Both of them were found guilty. Both were thrown into pits. Both had an angel protect them. No harm came to either one. We're going to find out here in a moment there's a second decree in both of them. One to honor God, one to fear and revere God. Nebuchadnezzar said that no other God can rescue in this way. Darius is about to say that God saves and rescues. There's tons of similarities. There's 2 big differences, though. I don't know if you caught those. One is the attitude of the king. When the boys didn't bow down to the statue, Nebuchadnezzar was hot. Sorry for the pun. It was accidental, honestly, I promise. Darius was mourning and grieving. I think there's a second difference, and I think this is the important one that really gives us the difference between these 2 stories. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were clear in that they were unsure of God's ability to save them. Daniel, it tells us, he trusted God. Like, it's clear. He trusted God. How could Daniel be so sure? How could he, in the face of such an event, just walk into it with such trust? Because he had 60 years of these memories. I can imagine if we were to go read back through the pages of history that go in between these pages we have here. I think that the night after chapter 3 happened, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went and had supper with Daniel. I think they walked in and Daniel went up to him and goes, and they didn't even smell like smoke. I think they sat together over a meal and talked about their fears. And talked about what it was like to be lowered into a fire and not feel the heat. What went through their mind when this angel appeared. What they talked about all night with the angel. What it did to their faith. That just high that it would have brought to them. If God is with us, he is so real. How amazing. And I suspect, however many years those 3 guys were alive, that those 4 had those kind of conversations over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so that in this moment, Daniel was able to tap back into those moments when God, in such clear way, stepped into the foreground and made his presence known. that then Daniel was able to say, God, I trust you, even in this one. We should say the same thing we said in chapter 3, and that is the point here is not that God will rescue. That's actually not true. And if you've been watching the news this week, you know it's not true. There's no guarantee of the results. That's not the point, though. The point is that he's trustworthy. It's that God doesn't always step out of the background, but he is always trustworthy. Whether we know, whether we sense, whether we see his presence or not, he is there. He is the living God, and he is paying attention. And if he has called us to something, he will be faithful to us as we trust him in it. And that can be so hard. It can be so hard. And we need to remember how God has stepped out of the background in the past to give us courage and faith in the present, with whatever challenge it is in the present, whichever situation it is in the present. We need to remember how he tangibly cared for us and showed his trustworthiness in the past so that today we can move forward with confidence and faith in him, that we can obey him. Make no mistake, he is trustworthy. So the king gave another order. Those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den. They, their children, and their wives. Does that bother anybody? It bothers me. They did not even hit the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And then Daniel wrote to all the prophets, the people, the nations, the language groups who were living in the land, peace and prosperity. I have issued an edict all throughout all the dominion of my kingdom, of my kingdom people are to revere and to fear the God of Daniel, for he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His authority is forever. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. That is quite the edict. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Have you noticed that every chapter so far has ended with Daniel and the boys thriving? Every single one. I'm also not sure if you've noticed, but a primary theme of every chapter so far is trusting God. Jeremy and I were talking about this week. I said, I think we preach that message every week. It's been a constant theme. I think what we're to take away from this is that if you and I want to thrive in exile, if we want to be faithful in exile, we must trust God. If you don't trust God, you're going to be overcome with fear and anxiety and worry. You're going to revert back to trying to control the situation for yourself. You're going to try to do things the world's way. The only way for us to thrive in exile is to trust him, to remember that he is the living God. And yes, there are plenty of times when we look around our lives and it appears that he's absent. It appears that he's not stepping to the forefront like we wish he would in this situation. But we should remind ourselves that he is the living God. He is there. He is present. He does care. He is doing what brings him the most glory and us the most good. And so even in those moments when things are tough and he's still in the background, we operate on what we know to be true, not what we might start to tell ourselves. He is there. He is present. He's not just absent. He is sovereign. He is placing and removing leaders and people in our lives. He is the giver of grace and blessings and powers and abilities. He is absolutely involved. In the good times and the bad, he is there. The question is, do we trust him or not? Trust is a verb, by the way. It requires action. To say I trust him and take no action means you actually don't trust him. My favorite picture of this is a chair. Every time we sit down, we demonstrate trust. Because we can look at a chair like this, and I could ask you, do you trust the chair? And you could look at it, you could say, well, yeah, I mean, it's metal, it's sturdy, like it's not flexing, like, it's held together well. The materials made here seem to be good quality materials. You could look at this chair, you could examine this chair, you could know a lot about this chair. You could study it in every way possible, from the metals to the wood in it to the fabrics. You could know everything there is to know about this chair. And I could ask you, do you trust the chair? And you could say, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, until you sit in the chair, you haven't trusted the chair. You've just simply stated your trust in the chair. See, for us to trust God, it requires us to sit in the chair. In those moments when we're not sure what's happening, when God is in the background and we're starting to think maybe he's absent, and we're wondering, he asks me to do this or to do that or to not do these things or to go in this direction. He's calling me to do whatever it is he's asking me to do. Do I trust him? The only way we actually trust him is to do those things or to not do those things, whichever it may be. In order for us to trust him requires action, not just mental. Our challenge from Daniel chapter 6 is to ask ourselves, do we trust him enough to sit in the chair? That as this life as exiles goes, as things get difficult, as situations come up, as hard as it is, and let's be honest, it is hard to trust God sometimes. We're going to sit in the chair. Everything inside you is going to tell you to do something different, to take control, to take your own means, your own ways. But to trust him means you're going to sit in the chair and say, God, I trust you. If we're really honest, we're often going to say, God, I trust me more than I trust you. But to trust him means we're going to rely upon him, place our lives upon him, and trust him. God is always present, often in the background, sustaining all of creation totally unnoticed. But sometimes he steps to the foreground in unmistakable ways. And as disciples of Jesus, those of us who want to walk faithfully with him, who want to follow him in obedience, we need those times when he steps to the foreground. We need to grab and hold on to those tightly so that when those times come when we know we're supposed to sit in that chair, but everything about us doesn't want to, we remember his faithfulness, we remember his trustworthiness, and we trust him, and we sit in the chair of faithfulness. I don't know what challenges you're facing today, what it is that's in your life that's pressing on your faith a little bit. Our encouragement from Daniel chapter 6 is you remember he is trustworthy. Would you trust him with that? Let's pray. Father, we thank you. We praise you. We are so humbled. We are so overwhelmed by who you are, by your trustworthiness. Father, you know that walking this path is hard. And God, you know that there can be plenty of times when we start to to question you simply because you haven't stepped out of the background lately. Father, would you reassure us that you're here? God, I know there's folks here today. I know there's people who are part of our church this morning, either here or online or somewhere, that they need you to step forward right now, God. Would you do so? In some form. And God, help them not to miss it, just like you did with me so many years ago. Father, give us the encouragement. Give us that bolster we need to walk faithfully with you. Father, you're so good, you're so kind, you're so gracious in this. We ask this in Jesus' name.